Montana Territory, Beaverhead County, near the town of Dillon, the 12th of December 1884. On the ice-covered hillside of the Big Hole Valley, the region's most renowned barn builder, Harold Merritt, stood before a structure he considered wrong from the very first principle of physics. Widow Eleanor Whitlock was digging an underground horse barn that relied entirely on the stable temperature of the earth layer and natural pressure differences to regulate the. Harold looked at the low entrance, the earth-covered roof, and the small vents like mere cracks, then concluded without hesitation. This thing will kill every horse. In his view, humidity would rise, air would stagnate, snow load would create pressure beyond the roof's bearing capacity, all certain death for any animal trapped inside. The rumor spread through Dillon in a single afternoon. People called it the Burrow Barn, a mistake they believed a strong gust from the Rockies would be enough to prove foolish. They trusted generations of experience. Barns must be open, tall, and allow wind to pass through to dry. Eleanor believed in something else. Earth doesn't change temperature as quickly as wood, and wind is the killer of everything in winter. 11 months later, when the record-breaking snow-keep blizzard of 1,885 dumped 11 feet of snow and temperatures plunged to negative 42 degrees Fahrenheit, every wooden barn in the region lost heat, cracked walls, and collapsed roofs. Horses died from wind chill in just a few hours. Only the widow's underground barn, the one once mocked, maintained a steady 47 degrees Fahrenheit throughout 6 days without power, without fire, without. This is the story of a woman with no fame, no status, who relied solely on basic physics and the instinct to survive, and was right when the Blacktail Ridge area in southwestern Montana in late 1884 was always considered the gateway for Canadian cold winds. Here, temperatures could drop to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit, and winds funneled through the mountain gaps of the Rockies could produce wind chill factors of negative 50 degrees Fahrenheit in just minutes. Frost coated every surface, and dry snow blew sideways like sand, capable of penetrating even the smallest wooden cracks. For horses, 4 factors: wind, snow, humidity, and temperature variation combined into a deadly equation. The previous winter, that same equation had claimed Eleanor's husband, Samuel Whitlock, when he tried to lead their last 2 horses into the barn during a storm. He died from rapid hypothermia, his body temperature plummeting from 98.6. Eleanor understood exactly why they died. Traditional wooden barns with vertical plank walls and countless wind gaps could not withstand 30-40 miles per hour's cold winds. Sloped roofs, thought to be sturdy, became weak points under strong gusts. The warm, moist breath of horses met cold wood surfaces and instantly froze, making the air even damper, colder, and more prone to heat loss. She saw wooden barns as a flawed equation. Light material plus large wind-exposed surface plus poor ceiling, and she knew that reusing that model would mean losing more. From pain and responsibility, Eleanor pored over Samuel's notebooks and the old pages of her grandfather who had once lived in a sod house in northern Europe. What caught her attention was not the specific techniques, but a repeated principle. Places with harsh winters all relied on earth to survive. Soil temperature at depths of 3-4 feet remains nearly constant year-round, fluctuating very little, usually staying within 40-50 degrees Fahrenheit regardless of surface weather. Earth doesn't cool quickly, nor heat quickly. It is stable, durable. From that conclusion, she decided to do what no one in Montana Territory had ever tried: dig a horse barn into a hillside where Earth's heat could maintain a steady 45 degrees Fahrenheit even when outdoor storms dropped to negative 40 degrees Fahrenheit. A choice not based on tradition, but on physics. A choice not based on hope, but on survival. Eleanor chose the south-facing slope of Blacktail Ridge not because it was convenient or easy to dig, but because all the physical data pointed in one direction. It was the only place capable of withstanding a Montana winter. Winter winds blew predominantly from the northeast at average speeds of 25-40 miles per hour, reaching 55 miles per hour on some nights. Each gust acted like a blade, carrying away heat from animal bodies. Positioning the entrance off the main wind axis immediately reduced cold pressure on the structure by 20-30%. A significant number in a land where negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit was considered merely early winter. The natural 14 degrees slope of the hillside allowed the back wall, once excavated, to be embedded in stable earth, a natural heat reservoir holding 45–48 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. Regardless of whether the surface froze 12 or 24 inches, the soil at her chosen spot had near-perfect composition, 40% clay for cohesion, 35% sand for drainage, the rest organic matter to maintain structure, and just enough moisture. Most importantly, this soil type had a slow thermal conductivity, meaning it didn't change temperature rapidly like wood or metal. When Eleanor dug down to about 16 feet, roughly the height of two men standing on each other's shoulders, the three walls became a massive continuous earth mass, acting as a high-inertia heat battery. To her, this was not a bold idea. It was simply the only way to create a space where the rate of heat loss did not exceed a horse could lose 70–80 degrees Fahrenheit through its coat in minutes if standing in a drafty wooden barn. Eleanor understood this even without an engineering degree. She had learned it from the winters that took her husband. So she built the barn roof with a 12-degree slope just enough to shed meltwater without letting it seep into the earth, while still allowing snow to accumulate as a natural insulating blanket. When snow reached 24–30 inches thick, common in the region, it acted like an enormous blanket, pushing the roof's R value to match the sod houses of northern Europe her grandfather had described. In this model, snow was no longer the enemy. It was an ally that required no coal, no labor, yet insulated better than any wooden roof could achieve. The ventilation system Eleanor designed was not based on guesswork, but on a simple law: cold air is heavier than warm air. She placed low vents about 8 inches above the floor, precisely where cold air pools to draw moisture and animal breath into a collection trench. High vents sat just beneath the sod roof, only 5–6 inches below the surface. The height difference created a natural chimney effect, expelling just enough warmth. Beneath the floor, Eleanor dug an additional 2-foot-deep cold trench, wide enough to trap dead, cold air. This was the principle used for centuries in root cellars, ice houses, and Scandinavian storage cellars. Keep cold at the bottom so the main space remains 10–15 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. When outside, but what truly marked the structure as Eleanor's was not the numbers or the design, it was the way she verified every detail, as if one wrong measurement meant one more death. For 34 days before winter, she measured temperature with a mercury thermometer every morning and recorded another reading every evening. She lit a wisp of straw and watched the smoke direction. If it drifted straight down the trench, she ran an oil lamp along the earth walls and wooden frame. Any strong flicker meant a draft, and she sealed it that same night. Her notes were not verbose, but precise. Day 12, floor temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Left vent 15% too weak. Day 19, roof snow 9 inches thick. Interior temperature unchanged. No room for chance, no blind faith. Every measurement was a reminder. If she was wrong, but Eleanor was not wrong. She did not invent physics. She simply listened to it. And that turned a ridiculed widow's project into the safest shelter Red Valley had ever known in its history. Men from all over Red Valley climbed the Blacktail Ridge hillside as if attending a weekend entertainment rather than witnessing a survival structure. They stood in a circle around the pit where Eleanor Whitlock was digging, coats flapping in 20–25 miles per hour, cold wind, and every shovel strike into the earth drew murmurs like. To them, this was not a horse barn, it was a mad experiment with a foregone conclusion. Roof collapse, frozen horses, and a widow losing the last of what she had. Children ran around, small boots stomping thin snow, shouting taunts learned from adults. Burrow barn, rat burrow barn, echoing the region's exact thoughts. A group of builders stood near the wooden fence, their tone mixing pity and arrogance, talking about snow weight in Red Valley 12 to 20 inches in a single night, roof pressure possibly exceeding 30 pounds per square foot, then shaking their heads, concluding that women simply couldn't understand such figures. One declared with certainty that earth roof will crack with just a 40 miles per hour's wind, snow will pile in, and those words spread faster than the north wind, becoming the evening story in every home, as if the whole region had silently agreed to write an obituary for Eleanor's work. Then Harold Merritt appeared. In Red Valley, his word carried more weight than winter snow. He had built nearly 40 wooden barns in 20 years, and every rancher consulted him before raising a roof. Harold organized a full public inspection, classic frontier community style. He stood on the pit's edge, arms crossed, voice carrying far in the cold air. Digging this deep would trap toxic gases. Small vents would cause mold. Flat roof would collapse under snow. Every sentence was a judgment, and as always, the whole region believed him instantly. In the town of Patton, women gathered outside the general store whispered that since losing her husband, Eleanor had lost her senses, that grief had blinded her into gambling. They meant no malice, they simply repeated the era's prejudice. Women had no place in engineering, let alone challenging men's experience. Eleanor became the symbol of the boundary crosser, something society at the time met with suspicion and ridicule. Amid the noisy crowd, only Ada Slowhawk, a Lakota woman, stood silent. Ada watched for hours, as if reading the movements of earth and wind rather than observing a widow. When Eleanor looked up, sweat frozen into a thin layer on her forehead, Ada stepped forward and said quietly, "Only those who listen to the earth understand winter." No further explanation, but the words carried the weight of generations, living in harmony with nature, entirely different from the loud laughter behind her. The following days brought only silence and labor. Eleanor continued cutting sod blocks, remeasuring slopes with rope and stone, testing vents with a trembling oil lamp in the wind. She did not argue, did not explain, did not try to prove anything. In history, those who need to be right often speak the most. Those who must be right to survive stay silent. Night fell. The hillside pitch black. Wind howled through the unfinished entrance, sounding like the valley's oil lamplight cast Eleanor's shadow on the freshly dug earth wall, small but resolute. Alone under a -10 degrees Fahrenheit sky, she worked as if the earth itself were her only remaining ally. And amid all the mockery, warnings, prejudice, and pitying stares, there was one truth everyone felt, but no one voiced. They were not opposing Eleanor because they hated her. They opposed her because they feared that she, a widow with no reputation, no credentials, and if she was right, it meant the entire community had lived with error for decades. In a place as harsh as Montana, where the price of mistakes is paid in livestock lives and long winters stretching into April, that truth was more terrifying than any blizzard. Eleanor finished the final sod layer on the roof one calm October afternoon, covering it with tightly packed dry grass, then installed the pine airlock door she had hand-carved over 3 straight nights. In the short corridor leading to the main chamber, she hung a crossbeam for an oil lamp, just a small detail, but enough to make the underground barn feel no longer like a dirt pit, but a true shelter. When the horses first stepped inside, their reaction made Eleanor pause. No tension, no startling, no constant stamping as in wooden barns. They simply breathed deeply, shook their heads lightly, then stood calmly, as if recognizing a far more stable space. No drafts, no cold blasts hitting their chests, no creaking wood every time weather changed. Eleanor watched them, then checked the entire system again. She held a piece of cotton near the low vent to see airflow direction. It tilted slightly left, so she noted. Left vent pulls stronger than right. She poured water into the drainage trench to observe flow rate and listened to it trickle through gravel. She touched the sod wall, still holding a surprisingly steady temperature. Every test was recorded, not to prove anything to others, but to ensure she would not lose again this winter. From a distance, villagers still watched every. They gathered in small groups at the end of the dirt road, tipping hats to shield eyes from the setting sun, looking up the hillside for the moment the earth roof would collapse or walls would crack. Just one crack would be enough for them to say they had been right. But all they saw was a silent, solid earth mass, unmoved by wind. The underground barn stood there like a prehistoric shelter, voiceless, unarguing, simply existing, and it was that very silence that began to unnerve the entire valley. The first day arrived not with snow, but with silence. Near noon, temperature dropped more than 20 degrees Fahrenheit in just hours, and the sky turned thick, lead-gray flat light, so still that old folks in the region whispered the wind was holding its breath before the hardest blow. Air stood motionless, not a blade of grass stirring, as if the whole valley awaited a crushing strike. On the second day, that strike came more fiercely than any forecast. Wind chill reached -45 degrees Fahrenheit. Dry snow whipped sideways, hard enough to tear skin. Visibility fell below 10 steps. The nearest fence vanished from Eleanor's sight in seconds. She had to lean into the wind to reach the underground barn's vent, sweeping away newly formed ice with her hand for one final check before being forced to take shelter indoors. The third day opened with the sound any Montanan dreads. Wind howling, traditional barns began shaking like empty drums. Each gust through the planks made horses tremble violently, their breath freezing into white frost on nostrils within minutes. Water froze solid in buckets. Near noon, a wooden barn on Miller's land suffered. She had to crawl up the hillside, hands pressing into packed snow, feet slipping constantly. Each step was a small battle. When she cleared the snow blocking the underground barn's vent, warmth brushed her hand, not hot, but soft, steady, living warmth. That single flow of air alone eased her heart a beat. The underground barn was still working, earth still held heat. Screams of horses from many homes rose, then fell silent forever. When the cries stopped, everyone understood what it meant. Harold Merritt stood before his own wooden barn, watching the door rattle violently in the wind, knowing that despite having been the most certain naysayer, he could not argue with the wind. He had lost, and so had his horses. The sixth night was the darkest. Outdoor temperature fell to -42 degrees Fahrenheit. Winds exceeded. Eleanor's window panes rattled in waves, as if about to burst from their frames. She lit the oil lamp, placed her hand on the temperature notebook, and whispered a trembling prayer through cold and fear. "Samuel, keep them alive." Outside, the wind roared like the howl of the entire mountain range. But beneath 16 feet of earth, where the underground barn lay quiet, she hoped. When the final howl of the snow-keep blizzard faded from the valley, and the thick gray sky opened into a silence so heavy you could hear the snow falling, Eleanor pushed herself up from the wooden chair that had rattled for 6 straight days. Outside, snow reached her hips, blanketing the ground in a flat white sheet polished smooth by the east wind. No trace of fences remained, no trails, just a cold expanse stretching endlessly, as if the storm had erased the boundary between earth and sky. Eleanor plunged into the snow to climb the hillside. Each step, a gasping compression, in the lingering -30 degrees Fahrenheit cold. Her gloves stiffened, her hands numb to the point they felt detached from her body. She followed memory to find the exact entrance to the underground barn, since every landmark had vanished. Snow had drifted from the ridge, piling nearly a meter thick over the airlock, compacted into a solid block. Eleanor had to claw away layer after layer with both hands, her breath exploding into thick white clouds in the frigid air. The closer she got to the door, the harder her heart pounded. The storm had killed too many across the region. She knew that without looking. If the underground structure hadn't held heat, if her trusted physics calculation was off by just 57 degrees Fahrenheit, if the snow load had been too heavy, then behind that door would... When the airlock swung open, Eleanor stepped back in shock. A wave of warmth hit her face, not the fierce heat of a stove, but the slow, dense, living warmth characteristic of deep earth, the 45-47 degrees Fahrenheit kind that sustains life without inviting complacency. It felt like opening the door to a geothermal vault in the middle of a whiteout. It stood in complete opposition to the -40 degrees Fahrenheit she had just crossed. There, Samuel's 6 horses stood calmly, heads lowered into the hay manger, eating lightly as if they had only endured an ordinary cold night. Not one trembled, not one breath frosted their nostrils in bursts, not one eye clouded from heat loss. The floor was dry, the earth walls warm, the sod roof overhead seemed oblivious to Snowkeep's fury. Eleanor knelt, placing her hand on the floor. The ground was warmer than her palm, the surest sign that the earth had done what she hoped. Maintained stable temperature throughout all 6 days. Day 3, the storm's peak, with 63 miles per hour's winds and temperatures dropping to -41 degrees Fahrenheit inside the barn rose to 47 degrees Fahrenheit. The next 3 days, interior temperature fluctuated only 2-3 degrees Fahrenheit, never straying from the 45-47 degrees Fahrenheit range. In Montana, even a well-built wooden house couldn't maintain such stability. At depths of several feet, soil holds nearly constant temperature, varying only 2-3 degrees Fahrenheit between harsh winters and hot summers. Second, the nearly 3-foot thick snow blanket on the roof had become a natural insulator, reducing heat loss equivalent to dozens of layers of building material. Snow is a killer if you stand exposed in a storm, but when still, it is a perfect blanket. Third, stable, with wind unable to penetrate the earth walls, no sudden pressure differentials tore heat away as in wooden barns. The horses retained their body heat, each producing roughly 1,200 British thermal units per hour, and the earth held most of it. That was the truth that everything mocked, ridiculed, and dismissed for an entire year had proven to be the only thing that stood firm against the storm. She sank down, arms wrapped around her chest, not from exhaustion, not from fear, but because she had finally kept her after a year of doubt, contempt, and marginalization simply for being a widow. Eleanor rose amid the storm's remnants and proved what the entire valley had never dared believe. A woman with no fame, no credentials, relying only on physics and her husband's memory, could defeat the harshest winter in 30 years. The earth had kept its word to her, and she had kept her word to the man she loved. After 6 days of the snow-capped blizzard devastating the valley, Red Valley began tallying the damage. The numbers emerged colder than the outdoor temperature. Nearly 62% of the region's horses died from hypothermia, drafts, and collapsed barn roofs. Some families lost everything 100%, leaving only shattered wooden frames and thick snow covering the frozen bodies of animals they had raised. The bad news spread quickly from ranch to ranch. Like an indictment against the traditional wooden barn, designs long considered the unchangeable standard. In that context, people began making their way to the hillside where Eleanor's underground barn lay quietly beneath the snow. Many came not hoping for anything good. They came to confirm that the so-called burrow barn had collapsed, or at least to prove a widow's underground stable could not possibly survive. When they drew near, the first thing they saw was not wreckage, but the faint glow of an oil lamp seeping from the airlock. That light was so small it looked like a feeble breath. Inside, the barn was not the dark hole they had mocked. It was stable, dry, and adequately lit by the hanging oil lamp in the corridor. A world turned upside down, someone whispered, because while all of Red Valley was counting dead horses, here Eleanor's herd stood strong, heads high, coats glossy, and no weight lost after 6 days of storm. The entire region began comparing losses. Harold Merritt, the man who had declared the underground barn would kill every horse, lost 5 out of 7. He stood silent, eyes red, staring at his wet gloves without a word. The Stewart Hale family, owners of one of the valley's largest barns, lost 8 out of 10. They dug through snow to remove the bodies, each horse dead from heat loss before the roof gave way. Catherine Dunn, 6 horses, 6 out of 6 alive, standing firm, even calm to the point of shock. Not one hypothermic, not one with labored breathing, not one shedding coat, not one underweight. If not for the chest-high snow outside, they might have thought the storm was just a rumor. No one in the crowd laughed anymore. No one called it a rat burrow anymore. Silence spread out. A child tugged his mother's hand, looked at the warm earth walls, and asked in an innocent voice that sounded like the valley's own question, "Mom, is the earth warmer than the wind?" The mother hesitated, then only bent down and squeezed her child's hand tighter, because on that day, for the first time in generations, the adults of Red Valley had no answer. Only the truth standing before them. A widow had been right. Harold Merritt returned to Red Valley on a morning when the wind whipped so hard his footsteps were swallowed by the air. No more laughter, no more confidence from the builder once respected across the region. He fought the wind down the hillside to where Eleanor's underground barn lay quiet, hands shaking not only from cold, but from the 5 horse carcasses lying in his own wooden barn. 5 animals he once believed traditional barns could protect. He opened his mouth with difficulty, voice hoarse as if winter itself had been taken from him. "I lost 5. I was wrong about everything." The 2 stepped into the underground barn. The gentle warmth spread out, making Harold pause for several seconds, as if his body could not comprehend why an underground space could be more. Not to inspect, but to acknowledge he had not understood how important these things were. Eleanor explained calmly, without smugness. Convection vents draw cold air to the bottom. The cold trench holds dead air stable. The 36-inch sod earth roof creates thermal mass. The triangular bracing distributes snow load. No technique was magical, just physics and respect for it. That afternoon, Harold returned to town and did what no one imagined he would. He entered into the council record book, where the region's technical decisions were usually kept a clear, straightforward public statement. A widow has saved more lives than our entire... That line was a greater shock than Snowkeep itself, for it was not merely personal admission of failure. It was the first opening toward a shift in thinking for all of Red Valley, that no one holds a monopoly on truth, and sometimes the ridiculed one is the only one looking in the right direction of the wind. When the ice thawed and Montana's ground softened again, Red Valley entered a spring unlike any before. The valley that once mocked Eleanor now lined up at her door, bringing shovels, sketches, and questions. Ada Slowhawk walked with Eleanor across every hillside, pointing to soil types, moisture levels, and wind directions. Speaking in the calm voice of one who understands nature better than books, this spot holds heat. That one wind cuts. That one snow presses hard. Knowledge once dismissed as native superstition now became the foundation of survival. The entire community began learning the techniques as if learning a new language, the language of earth, wind, and heat. They dug to the correct 12, 16 feet depth for thermal mass. They tested soil-bearing capacity by compacting each layer. They installed double-door airlocks to retain 25–30% more heat. They layered sod precisely 30–36 inches for the highest natural R value. They oriented vents to northern winds for stable pressure differential. Those who once declared women don't understand snow load now stood beside Eleanor, holding slope gauges and asking small questions they previously thought unnecessary. Then an unexpected event occurred. A state engineer from Montana, hearing about the widow Whitlock's underground barn, rode to Red Valley for an on-site inspection. He brought soil thermometers, airflow meters, and R-value gauges. The whole community watched as he crouched, recording every parameter. Soil temperature stable at 47–49 degrees Fahrenheit at barn depth. High-low vent airflow consistent. No negative drafts. Sod R value equivalent to 1.52 feet of fiberglass. Finally, he wrote in his report, Whitlock Earth Shelter System. Remarkably effective. One of the most precise applications of thermal mass and wind buffering ever seen in Montana territory. That report spread to Helena and onward to other counties. The following winter became the final test. But this time, it was entirely different. Not a single horse died in the new underground barns. Wood consumption dropped more than 60% because no desperate heating was needed as before. Families accustomed to burning more to survive a few extra hours now realized they were using the least fuel in years, while the barns stayed warmer than their own homes. Red Valley, once the place that mocked a widow, now passed around a new saying, a saying that would become the guiding principle for the entire community. Build with nature, not against it. In just one season, what had once been considered a joke became the standard for survival, and the one who started that change remained simply a widow standing on a hillside, thanking the earth for keeping its promise. Several years after the Snowkeep blizzard, Red Valley had literally changed color. The wooden barns, once standing upright on the surface, now rotted, leaned, and broke from time and mountain winds, while Eleanor Whitlock's underground barn remained as solid as the day it was built. The thick sod roof bloomed with wildflowers every summer, gold, purple, white, turning a structure once called a horse grave into a peaceful bright spot on the hillside. The descendants of Samuel Whitlock's herd continued living there, born in the geothermal warm space and growing up never knowing the sound of wind howling through wooden walls like their predecessors. To the people of Red Valley, that barn was no longer just a winter shelter. It was proof that one woman's memory, loss, and practicality could transform an entire region. At the end of 1889, the villagers erected a simple pine sign at the entrance, letters deeply carved but unadorned. Eleanor Whitlock, she trusted the earth when others trusted the wind. No one argued over the wording. No one edited it, because the entire valley understood that sentence was not just about one winter, but about a shift in mindset that lasted a generation. The final philosophical note of the story rang out in true historical spirit, simple yet sharp as a wind-splitting blade. It is not different ideas that are dangerous. The danger lies in becoming so accustomed to mistakes that we regard them as truth. And like every survival story from the American frontier, the technical lesson returns to its rightful place. Thermal mass retains heat better than hope. Earth shelter is more stable than defiance, and humility before nature always triumphs over human pride. When lives depend on truth, the crowd is no longer the standard. Only physics remains, only reality remains, and only structures intelligent enough to survive remain. If you want to hear more true survival stories based on techniques that once saved lives on the American frontier, please subscribe so you don't miss out. Thank you for following. See you in the next journey of discovery.